Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4, and today we're going to be trying to figure out which LMG is best suited for long-distance combat by taking a closer look at a number of guns in a little more detail. Light machine guns, in my opinion, are actually best suited for long-distance combat in Battlefield 4, and this comes down to a number of factors, including gun stats, but also the class, the support class as such, the gadgets it has available, and the gun selection that it can choose from. And if you want to know a little bit more on this topic, feel free to leave down a comment below, and then I'll know that kind of a few people are interested in the topic, and I may actually make a quick 5-minute video on the role of the support player in Battlefield 4. With that being said, though, what weapons are we going to be looking at today? Well, we're going to be looking at the LSAT, the QBB 951, the RPK, formerly known as the RPK 74M, and the RPK 12. Now, I can hear some of you out there asking, well, why haven't you talked about this gun or that gun? And I'm going to quickly go over some of the LMGs you may think should be in this comparison but aren't, and why I haven't put them in this comparison. First and foremost, the PKP Pejanek, this Chinese machine gun, has a number of stats that make it well suited for long distance combat, but the recoil on this gun is just too hefty to control at longer distances. At least I personally find it to be a hindrance to this gun. So for me, the PKP Pejanek is not really suited for longer engagements. The same goes for the M60E4. This gun suffers the same kind of too hefty recoil while having a relatively high damage model that would usually assist it. Again, the M240B, same story, too much recoil in my opinion, even though it has this higher damage model to be usable at very long ranges. Last but not least, we have the Type 88 LMG, and this is actually a quite capable gun at longer ranges. It's not included in this comparison because basically it is a version of the LSAT from a stat perspective that is slightly geared towards more medium engagement distances. So while you may see the operative footage of the Type 88 today towards the start or the end of this video, it's not included in this comparison because it basically is by default beat out by the LSAT because the LSAT is so similar. However, that's just a little bit more suited for long distance combat. So if you're looking for a gun that is more suited towards medium ranges when it comes to LMGs, feel free to try out the Type 88 LMG. Now, with all those things being covered, let's actually start looking at some of the weapons in a little more detail. Now, the LSAT, the first weapon we're going to be looking at today, has a standard damage model of 24.5 to 18, like most assault rifles and LMGs, basically giving it no advantage over most of the guns we're going to be looking at today. It has for the guns we're looking at today, relatively high fire rate of 650 rounds per minute. It has a medium-sized magazine of 100 rounds per minute. This is medium-sized for an LMG, but actually for the guns we're looking at today, it is the highest magazine size by quite a bit. Moving on then to reload times, given that this has the highest magazine of all the guns we're looking at today, it has got the worst reload at 5.9 seconds, both with one bullet in the chamber or no bullets in the chamber. Moving on then to recoil, this is a mixed bag. You have 0.28 degrees vertical recoil. Now, this is the quite hefty but not highest we're looking at today. It definitely is going to need some compensation on the player side. On the other hand, though, you have extremely low horizontal recoil at 0.125 both to the left and the right, making this gun ideal for long engagement combat because it means you don't have to consider your horizontal recoil, A, and B, that little bit of horizontal recoil you do have is even on both sides. Moving on to the first shot recoil multiplier, this is amazing on the LSAT at 1.25. Basically, you hardly have a first shot kick with this gun, meaning that you can tap fire this gun without any difficulties to your heart's content without having to consider that first shot kick that you usually would have to. On the ADS, our accuracy of this gun, it's quite good at 0.25, good for LMGs, however, not good for the comparison we've got today. It's on the worst side of guns we're looking at today at 0.25. ADS while moving and hip firing, on the other hand, is again not quite as good as you may want it to be at 5.5, the worst we're looking at today, but for LMG standards, actually, it can be a lot worse. With the LSAT being covered, let's move on to the QBB 951. Once more, we have the same 24.5 to 18 damage model, the same fire rate of 650 rounds per minute, a slightly smaller magazine of 76 bullets, kind of an odd magazine. I believe this is the only gun in the game that actually has a 75 plus 1 magazine. The reload time is better than the LSAT, but again, relatively slow given that you have quite a lot of bullets in your magazine at 4.3 seconds if you have one or more bullets left in the chamber, or 4.9 if you shoot every last one of your bullets. When we come to recoil with this gun, 0.24 vertical recoil is the best we're looking at today. It's a relatively stable gun when it comes to recoil vertically. However, when it comes to horizontal recoil, this gun has a kind of a little bit of an odd pattern, definitely pulling to the left with 0.19 degrees to the left and 0.09 degrees to the right. Of course, this recoil isn't hefty. It's not the worst we're looking at today, and it's certainly easily manageable. Otherwise, this gun simply wouldn't be in this long distance LMG comparison. Moving on then to the first shot recoil multiplier at 1.85. This is actually relatively high, making tap firing with the QBB 95-1 a little bit more difficult. It's the highest of the comparison today, and obviously can't keep up in the slightest with something like the LSAT. Moving on to accuracy, we have an 0.25 ADS value while standing and aiming down sight, similar to the LSAT, actually identical to the LSAT, and slightly worse than our competitors that we'll be looking at in just a second, but nothing to worry about too much. Moving on then to the hip fire while standing and while moving at 4. This is actually pretty bad given that it's an LMG. I would never hip fire an LMG unless in extreme close quarter, but it is the best we will be looking at today, although relatively irrelevant. Moving on then to the RPK or RPK 74M. This gun has a different damage model to all the guns we're looking at today, a higher damage model allowing it to perform a 4-shot kill to quite a significant range with a starting damage of 30 and a minimum damage of 20, guaranteeing a 5-shot kill at all ranges, something very useful when fighting at longer ranges. Now this gun has a slightly lower fire rate, obviously to help balance out the higher damage model of 600 rounds per minute. It has the smallest magazine we're going to be looking at today at 40+1 or 41 in total. Now reload time is interesting on the RPK 74M. It's the first gun to have a relatively high difference between the short and long reload today, with 3.15 seconds for the short reload, that is with one or more bullets left in the chamber, and a 4.2 second reload for the long reload. That's when you've burned through all bullets. It's the second best in our comparison today, only beat out by its brother, the RPK 12, and if in close quarter this could be a hindrance, but given that we're talking about long distance combat today, this is relatively good and quite competitive. When we move on to recoil, the RPK starts to pay for its higher damage model. It's got a quite hefty, for longer ranges, vertical recoil of 0.36 degrees and a recoil of 0.3 degrees to the left and 0.2 degrees to the right. This is going to hinder this gun's performance at extreme long ranges quite heavily, resulting in a forced very slow tap firing if you want to accurately hit your target. While you may be able to use the LSAT in a semi-automatic mode almost, shooting off 4, 5, 6 bullet bursts at your target at 100 meters, this could be a lot more difficult with the RPK 74M, and you must resort to, say, 2 or 3 shot bursts. The first shot multiplier, on the other hand, does help you tap fire this gun very well. It's shared with the LSAT, the lowest in our comparison today, at 1.25. Moving on then to the accuracy of the gun with an ADS while aiming down sight of 0.2. This is a very accurate gun, comparable to a assault rifle, and also quite good at hip firing with a value of hip firing while standing and moving of 4.5. It doesn't quite beat out the QBB 95-1, but it is tied for second place with the RPK 12. Speaking of the RPK 12, what does this gun have to offer? Well, once more, we have a standard damage model of 24.5 to 18, the same fire rates as the RPK 74M, and a slightly larger magazine size of 60+1 or 61. Now when it comes to reload times, this gun is the best in our comparison, even though it has a relatively large magazine, certainly larger than the RPK or RPK 74M as it's formerly known, with 2.4 seconds on the short reload and 3.3 on the long reload. That is when you've burnt through all your bullets. This gun is actually reloaded relatively quickly, which can be useful when you're getting rushed and you suddenly find yourself in a close quarter situation. Moving up then to recoil with 0.27 vertical. It is the third highest in our comparison today, excuse me. It's relatively high, very close to the LSAT, but definitely manageable, especially when considering your relatively low side-to-side recoil of 0.14 and 0.08 to the right, making this gun very controllable. Also, when looking at your first shot recoil multiplier, although not the lowest, it is 1.35, which means this gun can also very easily be tap fired if desired. Last but not least, we have the accuracy of the gun. Once more, we have a 0.2 ADS while aiming down sight. Excellent for hitting those long range targets. And like the RPK-74M, once more, a 4.5 hip fire while standing and moving value. Now that we've looked at all those guns in a little bit more detail, let's kind of take these stats, put them to one side, and talk about actual experiences. In reality, how do these guns perform and how are they best used? Each gun we have discussed today differs from its competitor in one or another way, making them each unique and best at a slightly different role, although we are trying to find, of course, the best long distance LMG. Now let's start off with the LSAT. And this gun has a lot going for it. It's got that decent fire rate of 650 rounds per minute, making it a little bit more flexible than say something like the RPK-12 at only 600 rounds per minute. But it does have something you have to consider. Even though it has this very nice low recoil model, making it very easy to shoot targets even very far out, if you cannot control its vertical recoil, you're going to have difficulties, and you cannot strafe while shooting. LMGs generally are not good for strafing while aiming down sight, and the LSAT is the worst of all the guns in this respect we're looking at today, with the RPK-74M or RPK and RPK-12 tied. Only the QBB95-1 is actually slightly more forgiving when strafing and shooting, and this is very important if you're trying to hit a longer range target that has a more accurate gun as you, for example, a sniper rifle. So the LSAT really is the king of the hill if you can train yourself to stand still, find your target, and shoot. However, if you're trying to move, hip fire, run and gun situations, the LSAT is going to let you down. Speaking, of course, of the QBB95-1, let's talk about it. Well, it's very similar to the LSAT in that it's got that same fire rate. It does, however, have that drawback. It has a relatively high first shot recoil multiplier for a long range gun at 1.85, which makes it less suitable for longer engagement combats if you're trying to tap fire. On the other hand, as we already said, it's a lot more forgiving for strafing and also more capable at hip firing than any of the LMGs we are actually looking at today. So where does this leave the QBB95-1? Well, for long distance combat, it leaves it slightly behind the LSAT, but it is slightly more versatile than, say, the LSAT, especially when you're talking about medium range combat. Moving on then to the RPK and RPK-12. These guns have a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. The RPK has this amazing damage model and it's very good at long distance combat, but if you really are strict about it and you say you're really looking only for the dedicated long distance LMG, then the recoil can get a little bit much to manage if you're shooting at that sniper far out in the distance. It's also got the smallest magazine we're looking at today, which can be a little bit of a difficulty, especially if you're trying to engage multiple targets at distance. However, the RPK is a not to be underestimated force at longer ranges and medium and close quarter combat. So if you're in a situation where you know you need an LMG not only exclusively for long distance combat, but also for something in between, then certainly try out the RPK. As I have said before many a times, it's one of the best guns in my opinion in the game. Last but not least, then we have the RPK-12. Can this stop the LSAT from winning? Well, a very difficult question. It does have slightly less recoil than the LSAT if you're talking about side to side, but only slightly. It pulls to the left instead of being equally balanced like the LSAT, and it's got a very similar vertical recoil. To combine with all that, it's got a minimalistically higher first shot multiplier for recoil, and it's also got a slightly slower fire rate. What comes to benefit this gun is a shorter reload time, which is not to be underestimated for close and medium engagements. However, we're talking about long distance combat where reload times are more or less unimportant. You're very unlikely to get rushed with an empty mag if you're shooting from 50-75 meters away. And so the RPK, while once more a very capable long distance gun, especially thanks to its very precise shots, relatively low recoil, can't quite keep up with the LSAT, because the LSAT just has that perfect recoil pattern, that side-to-side horizontal recoil that you do not have to compensate for, a slightly higher fire rate. and becomes a basically laser gun if you can actually stand still. So basically it's all about finding the gun that fits your playstyle perfectly. If you can train yourself to stand still and you're going for long distance targets almost exclusively, pick up the LSAT. If you have to strafe a little bit more, you're thinking about going a little bit more medium range close quarter, then try out the QBB 951 by all means. You're looking for an all-rounder king that will perform excellently at long range, the RPK is for you. And last but not least, the RPK 12, another capable long distance gun with a slightly affinity to also work in medium to close quarters. So that wraps up this weapon comparison. Feel free to let me know which gun you think or prefer on the battlefield, especially considering if you're a PC or console player, because that often seems to make a relatively large difference. Now, a lot of these guns are very close together, so your opinion may differ from mine, but I'd be happy to know why you think your preferred choice of gun is better than my preferred for long distance combat, which is the LSAT. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 4 video.